On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the surface of the moon. 600 million people watched it live, the largest television audience in human history at that point. The Soviet Union, America's direct competitor in the space race, with every reason in the world to expose a hoax, never disputed it. Their own tracking stations confirmed the mission was real. We have 842 pounds of lunar rock brought back from 6 separate Apollo missions. Rock that has been independently analyzed by scientists in dozens of countries, including countries with no political reason to protect America's reputation. We left retroreflectors on the lunar surface that any observatory on Earth can bounce a laser off right now and measure the exact distance to the moon. The evidence is not thin. It is overwhelming. And yet, a 2019 survey found that 1 in 6 people in the United Kingdom believe the moon landing was staged. In the United States, the number is similar. In some countries, it goes higher. This video is not about whether the moon landing happened. It happened. This video is about why a significant portion of humanity needs it to not have happened, and what that need reveals about the human mind. Apollo 11 launched on July 16, 1969. 4 days later, Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the Sea of Tranquility, while Michael Collins orbited above in the command module. Armstrong's first step onto the lunar surface was broadcast live around the world. They spent 21 hours on the moon. They collected samples, planted a flag, spoke to President Nixon by phone, and returned safely to Earth on July 24th. 5 more Apollo missions successfully landed on the moon between 1969 and 1972. 12 human beings walked on the lunar surface in total. This is not disputed by any major scientific institution anywhere in the world. So where did the doubt come from? In 1974, a journalist named Bill Kaysing self-published a pamphlet titled, "We Never Went to the Moon." Kaysing had worked as a technical writer at a rocket company in the 1950s, not an engineer, not a scientist, and his argument was essentially that the technology seemed too advanced for 1969. But that argument didn't land in a vacuum. By 1974, America had already lived through the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the Vietnam War, the Watergate scandal, and the revelation that the government had been systematically lying to the public about all 3. Trust in American institutions had collapsed, and into that collapse, Kaysing dropped a simple idea. What if the moon landing was one more lie? The timing was not coincidental. The conspiracy didn't create the distrust. The distrust created the conspiracy. Here's where the psychology becomes important. When humans lose trust in institutions, they don't simply become neutral. They become actively suspicious. The brain doesn't sit comfortably in uncertainty. It looks for an alternative explanation that restores a sense of order and understanding. Psychologists call this proportionality bias. When something feels enormously significant, like landing on the moon, the brain expects an equally enormous explanation. A straightforward story about engineers and astronauts and rockets feels somehow insufficient. The scale of the achievement demands a scale of conspiracy to match it. There is also the element of special knowledge. Believing the moon landing was faked places you in a group of people who see through the official narrative. You are awake. Everyone else is asleep. That feeling of perceptual superiority is psychologically rewarding in a way that simply believing the consensus never is. Psychologist Rob Brotherton, who studies conspiracy thinking, found that the pull toward conspiracy is not primarily about evidence. It is about the emotional and psychological needs the conspiracy fulfills. Certainty, community, a sense of significance, control over a confusing world. The moon landing conspiracy specifically fulfills all of those needs simultaneously. The evidence for the moon landing is extensive and independently verifiable. The retroreflectors left on the lunar surface have been used by observatories in multiple countries for decades. You cannot fake a physical object on the moon that reflects lasers. The 842 pounds of lunar samples have been studied by scientists in countries including the Soviet Union, Japan, Germany, and Australia. The geological composition of the rocks is unlike anything found on Earth and consistent with what we would expect from the lunar surface. The Soviet Union had its own lunar program and its own tracking infrastructure. They tracked Apollo 11 in real time. They knew it was real. They said nothing because there was nothing to dispute. Stanley Kubrick did not film it. The flag appears to wave because of the motion of planting it in a vacuum, where movement takes longer to stop. The stars are not visible because the camera exposure was set for the bright lunar surface, not the dark sky. Every major objection raised by conspiracy theorists has been addressed, tested, and debunked by independent researchers with no political stake in the outcome. The evidence doesn't move the needle for most conspiracy believers. And that fact alone tells you something important. If the evidence is overwhelming and the conspiracy has been thoroughly debunked, then why does it persist? Because for many people, the moon landing conspiracy was never about the moon. It was about trust. Specifically, the collapse of trust in government and institutions that happened in the late 1960s and early 1970s. If the government lied about Vietnam, if the government covered up Watergate, if the government concealed the truth about Kennedy's assassination, then why would the moon landing be any different? The conspiracy isn't irrational. It's the logical conclusion of rational distrust applied too broadly. And here's the uncomfortable truth that this gets to. The people who believe the moon landing was faked are not stupid. They are not crazy. They are people whose trust was broken by real events, real lies, real institutional failures, and who applied that broken trust to everything, including things that happened to be true. The moon landing conspiracy is not a story about gullibility. It is a story about what happens to a society when its institutions lose the right to be believed. And the fact that those institutions have continued to lie about other things since 1969 means that distrust has never had a reason to heal. The moon landing happened. 12 human beings walked on the surface of another world. It is one of the most extraordinary things our species has ever done. And somehow, knowing that it was real, that it happened exactly as they said it did, doesn't feel like enough for a significant portion of humanity. Because the question was never really about the moon. It was about whether the people telling you the story can be trusted. And that question remains completely unresolved.